Welcome to the show and welcome to Glow So Bright. So, are clone rifles practical for the prepared citizen? What is a clone rifle? Well, a clone rifle is a rifle designed to replicate that used by an organization, a certain end user, or a rifle that is found in popular media. For a rifle that is found and used with an organization, it could be from a certain era of time. For example, the 1960s onwards to the 1990s, the United States military has been using the M16A1 rifle, which we have a replica of that here.
Hi, funsies. Hi. Hi.
Or for a current issue service weapon in use by the United States military, we have a U.S. Army configuration M4A1 carbine.
Where's Saddam Hussein?
You have firearms in use by certain end users. For example, you have the Gordon carbine, a commercially produced Colt Car-15 in use during the Black Hawk Down operation by Gary Gordon, a Delta operator. Another thing you have would be the carbine in use by Jeff Gurich. I'll post a video of his video in the video description down below, but that video is on his personal carbine or replication of the carbine he was using during his Special Forces operations in Afghanistan. And then you have firearms that are used in media. This could be from the news, for example. Weapons in use by individuals that are found proliferating in news and media, for example, weapons used by criminals. Then you have weapons that are found featured in movies and video games, for example. The film Black Hawk Down, for example, was in use during the film Black Hawk Down, which has a replication of the Gordon carbine. And you also have video games such as Escape from Tarkov, Battlefield, Call of Duty. Yeah, that was a mess. But these are what I would consider clone rifles. Okay, let's go break down this question of are they practical for the prepared citizen down to multiple parts. The answer is, it depends. Let me explain further. So a lot of these clone rifles that are found from video games, I'd say would not be practical at all. Sure, some video games are more and more realistic and have things be featured in a more accurate portrayal or a more practical way. Most of the time they're not. Think of how many horrible and cheap crappy red dot sights are used and featured prominently in video games such as Call of Duty and PUBG and several others. Another thing to take a look at would be that a lot of these ones featured in these video games, they are put together in a way that doesn't make sense at all. Then you have firearms from movies. I'd say a lot of that would be similar to that in the video game category, where a lot of that would be stuff that isn't very practical, or a lot of the props and optics and stuff like that are ended up using cheaper substitutes just because they're not meant for proper function and use, but more as a prop for the movie. You know, much like how fake money would be used in films, but it's not really a problem because it's a film. However, if you use fake money in real life, it would end up very, very poorly for you. You have rifles that are set up by a specific end user. For example, for the Gordon carbine, these are rifles that are designed to replicate a rifle from a certain period of time in which the end user is restricted by budget, technology availability, and how to get, say, optics, parts, weapon parts, all this stuff from overseas to their area of operations, and also the context of their unit's standard operating procedure as well as how they set it up for their own context. For example, a Gordon carbine would not be pragmatic for today's use. Several of these parts can be found where other more modern parts, such as a rifle like this one, would be significantly higher quality. Better quality optics, more refined handguards, higher quality precision and tolerances, making for a more accurate and durable rifle. Many of these optics and parts are discontinued and very, very difficult and expensive to find, and for the most part, it doesn't really make sense to have for practical purposes. Sure, it's a neat historical piece, but otherwise, not so much. And there are several videos out there in which individuals would have that sort of copy of rifle and then try and use it in a competition and score in last place. One example would be, I think, for Moons Out, Goons Out, or one of the other competitions in which Ian McCollum had that particular rifle, or a very similar rifle to it, and scored a lot in pretty close to last place. And a lot of the limitations in the technology at the time had really set him back or made the rifle more difficult to use than contemporary ones. Same thing with rifles cloned by prolific criminals. Kind of hilarious, but if you see how these people ended up afterwards, it makes sense why these weapons aren't very useful. Let's move on to the next subject. Okay, so my last and final category for clone rifles would be rifles cloned from an organization or military issue. These would include, say, your standard AKM over here, your historical service rifle like your M16A1, your current issue rifle like the M4 carbine over here, and I'll even throw in military surplus rifles into the mix as well, such as the Mosin Nagant. So, the main strength and advantages of these particular weapons is that there is so much data about them. There are so many anecdotes on how these are used, what situations they work in greatly, some drawbacks and where there would be problems, and several documentation out there. For the AKM, you have the Soviet Manual of Arms over here, which has more or less everything in there to get an idea on how the rifle works. Maintenance, disassembly, operation, zeroing procedures, shooting, different shooting positions, and safety considerations. Similarly with, say, the M16A1 over here, you have FM 23.9, M16 marksmanship, and M16 use. You have DA pamphlet 75030 for maintenance. You have the United States Marine Guidebook of Essential Subjects, which has other topics about the M16A1 over here. Similarly with the M4A1 carbine over here, you have information on zeroing procedures, handling, marksmanship, TC 3229 for rifle marksmanship, how these are used. You have PS magazine for maintenance. Several military veterans out there who have experience with these things and how they work, and armorers out there who have an idea on how these things are put together. Similarly, you have many armorers' guides that are published by the United States Army and the Marine Corps. Crane has so much data on these weapons as well. Gas port sizes, gas port wear, how often these are used or can be shot until they're worn out or unserviceable, specs on whether parts are good or deficient. So much data out there that is extremely useful, and it makes it a known quantity. Now, some drawbacks of these clone rifles out there would be that these are kind of locked within the era they're in. The AKM over here, a bit obsolescent compared to modern firearms. At least this one over here has a optics rail on it, which makes it a bit easier to mount a reflex sight on it. You have the M16A1 over here, which the original plastic isn't as durable as modern plastic, not as modular as modern alternatives, and you have a 1 in 12 twist barrel, which means that if you find ammunition that is heavier than 55 grain, you're going to have significantly reduced accuracy beyond 100 yards. Then you have your standard issue M4 carbine, where a non-free floated handguard can cause issues with marksmanship. Look at the attached video in the video description below on why, and that these aren't as good as very modern alternatives. For example, the United States Marine Corps would consider the M16A4 to be a 4.5 MOA rifle to be acceptable. The United States Army Marksmanship Unit would consider a 4 MOA rifle to be acceptable for an M4 carbine. Meanwhile, you have, with the right ammunition, the right loading, more modern carbines such as a Geisley Super Duty, which can get MOA accuracy with the right ammunition loading, if not better. It's just that there are several different technologies out there, and parts that are better or could be a lower cost than trying to replicate these sorts of builds, or things that are just more pragmatic. And then you have, say, your military surplus rifles over here, where compared to a modern semi-automatic option over here, slow, clunky, and not that accurate. And while these have worked for a long time, they're quite obsolete, and sometimes the ammunition may be difficult to find for these particular rifles. Not particularly for this one in 7.60x54R, but you have things like 7.7 Arisaka ammunition for the Japanese service rifle. You have the Lee Enfield with 303 British cartridge, and those are very difficult to find, and when cartridges are available, they're quite expensive compared to more common rifles of similar power and use and niche like 308 Winchester or 7.60x54R. Heck, even the Canadian RCMP has phased out the Lee Enfield rifle for a more modern rifle chambered in 308 Winchester because the ammunition is now hard to find. But with these military clone rifles and military surplus rifles, there is a huge wealth of information on how these rifles are used, how they interface with load-bearing equipment, how to zero them, how to shoot them, the data on them, and many people out there are trained on them. So it's easy to find information. You also know how many expected rounds these can fire until the bolt breaks or the barrel wears out, or when parts need to be replaced. But with that, military replicas or clone replicas of rifles, of military service rifles, are a pragmatic option, but could be seen as a bit dated and could be a bit pricey. But otherwise, if you're not into that sort of thing, nothing really wrong with more modern offerings out there. You have, say this Geisley Super Duty over here, or it could be a rifle from BCM or Daniel Defense or so. Lighter handguards that are free-floated, that are robust. More modular optics. For example, this one can clear a backup iron sight, while if I try to mount the same optic with the same mount, a 1.5-inch mount on this M4 carbine over here, it would not work. A lot of these flaws from these military rifles would carry on. Better flashlights. The Surefire Scout Light is really, really good. Better triggers, and better ergonomics overall. But if cloning is not for you, you don't have to. A lot of these things are just novelties. Sure, some of them can be pressed for pragmatic use, and certainly getting shot with a 20-inch AR-15 is going to kill you, especially if you load it with like hunting ammunition or soft point ammunition. But if you're trying to look for rifles for pragmatic purposes, unless you already know what you're doing or you know how to operate, say like this rifle from military veterancy, why not go for something else? Now, if you did enjoy this video and find it informative, go ahead and hit that like button. Comment down below on what you think. Read the video description. If you'd like to support me financially, check out my Amazon affiliate links or my Ko-fi link. And the best way to provide support for my channel is to share, spread awareness, and subscribe. This video on Are Clone Rifles Practical for the Prepared Citizen is brought to you by Glow So Bright. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, so I've been having a bit of a wonky upload schedule lately, been a bit busy lately, or that, instead of going to SHOT Show, which, I have the catalog for, I instead, decided to check out a more accessible location, the Barrett-Jackson Auto Auction. I have all sorts of footage laying around, but I'm not sure what to do with it. This isn't really a car channel. I know how to maintain cars a little bit, but I'm not exactly a car person. So I'm not sure what exactly to do with this footage. But more stuff will come soon. Just got to clear out the filming and production pipeline, which is quite difficult as a single person, especially if you have to deal with issues and challenges like no cameraman or the weather being too adverse for use of camera equipment. But I greatly support your appreciation and patronage. And I'd like to thank you very much.